Today, our speaker is going to be Hristina Petrovska, something like that. She was born and raised in Macedonia and has been in Kalamazoo now for the past 11 years. She's a registered dietitian nutritionist and works as a food systems program coordinator at the Kalamazoo Valley Community College Food Innovation Center. She coordinates community classes and public events that are meant to bring people together around celebrating good food and building a just and sustainable future for all. She pulls inspiration from her homeland, Macedonia, for her family and fierce love for the natural world. And today she's going to be talking about food tastes from Macedonia. So this should be an interesting discussion, especially for people who like to try new foods and flavors.
Thank you, Nikki. And hello, everybody. Oh, and I see my folks from Macedonia joining as well. Zdravo. So what a cool thing that we have Zoom and we can connect with folks from all over the world, and then my family gets to be part of it as well. Usually they just hear afterwards, after the fact. So Nikki, I just want to say, and Marianne, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I know originally you had asked me to talk about plant-based holiday meals, that are holidays in the US approaching. And while I feel like I could have done that, it's really not my place so much to do that. And I come from another culture that has a deep cultural traditions around food. And I just want to share, just share a perspective, share a way of life that's been affected by the different geographical region and different food available. And so I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be able to be here with all of you today. I will go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully we'll do this in a way that we'll have time at the end for questions. So before we get started, I feel like for context, we need to look at the map and figure out where Macedonia is. If you're not familiar with this beautiful little country, I put this whole map of Europe here for reference, but Macedonia is right where that red pin is, right to the north of Greece, to the west of Bulgaria, to the east of Albania, and to the south of Serbia and Kosovo. So it's in the Balkan Peninsula. When I talk about Macedonia, you see this little country, the name is not even on there because it's so small. And when you zoom out on the map, they don't even show you the name. But I want to say that those borders weren't always there. The borders have been put up by different agreements, different political issues over the years. And so when I speak of Macedonia, it's not just Macedonia. These foods are not just locked into these borders. It's the whole region, the Balkan Peninsula. People have traveled and moved around and have been displaced in many different areas. And so traditions are born from many centuries of thousands of years, really, of influence. And so what I'll be sharing about today could be very well people from other parts of this part of the world could find familiar. But before I start sharing about the food, I want to share a little bit more about the country. As well, what it looks like. Tatična mut treba da pricnete. Mislim da vas slušam. Sorry, just saying the mute option to people in Macedonian. This is Macedonia. It's small, but it's full of mountains. It's full of glacial lakes, cliffs, canyons. The cities are densely populated, and it's a beautiful combination of architecture that stems from the many centuries of Ottoman Empire occupation that was in Macedonia, but also of the rich histories of Christianity and Islam in the same in the same spaces. So you will see in a lot of pictures, you'll see churches and mosques in the same place. And this is some more of Macedonia. It's the mountains are vast, the water is beautiful and fresh. You can, when you're hiking, you can just reach down to the stream, fill your hands with water and just drink it. And for me, it was a space where I found a lot of peace, a lot of opportunity to really connect with nature. And so it's part of our lives. And no matter where you go in Macedonia, you will see the mountains or you will be in the mountains. And so the mountains shape a lot of our agriculture as well. And these are some of our people. These are elders that have lived in these villages for this way of life for many, many years. And these photographs, I'll share a little bit more about these later, are photographed by my brother, Stefan. But I wanted to share the faces of some of our people, some of our elders. We've learned so much from oral histories and from teaching each other, and our elders hold a lot of the knowledge and wisdom. These are some of our other elders. This is Baba Sava, who my brother and I were visiting her village, and we were biking, and she immediately was like, "You kids must be hungry, gotta come to my house, I'll feed you." And she hugged that loaf of bread that she had baked and started cutting big hunks of bread to make sure she fills their bellies. And it's just a testament to the generosity of the people. No fear, just abundance to share and to see each other for who we are, just another fellow human being. These are also the people. So I show pictures of our babas and our grandmas, but in the cities, you know, you would see people dressed up, ready to go have their cup of coffee, and the streets are full of people walking and shopping. And I also included a picture of our traditional clothing, and in every village there is a different traditional clothing outfit that people wear for celebrations and for dancing opportunities. And right now, a lot of that history is just being kept through organizations who are actively nurturing it and teaching those dances and these traditions. But unfortunately, a lot of what I will share today, you know, I don't want to sound like, oh, this is like a dying down culture and tradition, but also I want to be realistic that Macedonia has not been immune to the globalization and capitalism and kind of like the cohesion of like influence. And so in this life that what I will show in some of these recipes and where they come from in these villages, it's also a difficult life. It's not to be romanticized, but also it's beautiful life, and we've learned so much from it. So it's like, I'm just really sharing it because I feel the need to share what I have been told and taught, so that we can keep having these conversations. These are some of the foods. I will go and kind of share more depth about the thought process about where all of our meals come from. But I just wanted to show some beautiful pictures, some sites that you see when you are walking around in those villages, where people have relied on really, maybe not just themselves, but they've relied on their tight-knit community to provide what they need for sustenance. This is a shepherd. This is a site that you would see in a lot of the hilly areas of the country, a lot of the villages that are on the hills. So there's villages that are like in the valleys, and there's villages that are on the actual hills. And on the hills, there's not a lot of food that can grow. So a lot of the people that live on the hills tend to animals. They tend to goats, to sheep, and to cows. And they are able to forage for food that wouldn't necessarily be usable by humans, and that land wouldn't really be productive for vegetables. And so they found a way to provide sustenance for their families in this way, and lived in harmony with nature in this way. This is a common sight also, you know, to see ducks and geese and chickens on the road because they were probably there before the roads were even built. So it's not like they're taking the road for cars. Like cars will often just stop, and these are domesticated ducks that it's common to see in the villages. And oftentimes people have their fields, if they're working in the field, it's not right next to their house. So the way property in Macedonian land it's a little bit different, where like people don't own like large parcels of land. People live in the village close together, and then if they have land that they're working, that's like on the outside of the village. And so people would often have to take either their animal or nowadays, you know, people take their tractors and their vehicles maybe to get to work on their field. But this is a picture of a family probably going back to the village from working in the field. And this is another site that you would see. I don't think it's this picture, but there was another one that was similar to this, where the cows were actually mowing the soccer stadium. So in the village where the kids play soccer, they would then have the cows go there and eat the grass, and then no need for mowers because mutually beneficial. The cows will get their snack, and the soccer field will be mowed. And it just depends on, so even within such a small country that is Macedonia, so it's about 2 million people, you will see that the diets are greatly different based on where people are and what they have available to them in their close proximity. Again, I'm speaking of this, like, even in the last 10 years that I've been here, things have drastically changed it. But even in the last 30 years, as people moved away from the villages and to the cities, this lifestyle that I'm talking about is unfortunately disappearing. So, but things also live in stories, so we have to tell the stories. This actually is a picture of some sheep that were grazing. This fence is a fence that my father built, my dad, and he actually built the fence to keep the sheep from going to his property, because the sheep are not fenced in, they're just roaming around in the fields. My dad had planted some fruit trees and some flowers and some strawberries, and he just wanted to make sure that the sheep and the goats don't come and help themselves to the fruit trees. But this is also a common sight where somebody from the village will take all of the sheep from everybody in the village and take them to the hills. And this is the common land. It's not like you don't have to own land to have the animals. You can just take them to the common land. And then they kind of tell you where they need to go, and they go where their food is. And they're very smart and know not to overgraze an area, because why would they when they can go and get fresher grass somewhere else? And so they kind of like naturally keep it. It's like a kind of like a migratory. It's not a really migration because they're domesticated, but they're also not controlled necessarily by the human of where to go. And so the shepherd just kind of follows them around. And they are very smart. They'll find water. They'll find everything that they need. This is some cheese we were served. This is feta, production of feta cheese. We use the word feta for the lack of a different word. I know feta is like this one particular recipe that's Greek. We have many different variation of feta, but it's this kind of like softer white cheese that people would make in different ways in the places where the animals are. And sometimes in the mountains, people would just like make the cheese up in their huts where the animals are grazing for the summer. And so the lifestyle of the people and the food reflects this landscape and reflects what's available, and it's seasonal. And so people would eat and prioritize different meals when they're in season, which means they wouldn't eat tomatoes year round. They wouldn't eat strawberries year round. So I want to start kind of like what I will do. I will go by the seasons, and the way that I thought about sharing, I will share several recipes as I'm talking about this. And if you want to take a picture of some of the recipes, you can go ahead, but I will go out through the seasons, and I will talk about what ingredients are abundant in the different season. And then what are some of the dishes that we make to celebrate that abundance, to enjoy that abundance, and to use it when it's available. And this is a picture of my beautiful Baba, my beautiful grandma, harvesting curly duck. We also call it stave. Stave is the word in Macedonian. And I will be honest, I've lived here 11 years in Michigan, and for the first 10, I didn't know what this plant, I didn't know what stave was in Michigan. I was like, there's this green that we eat in Macedonia. My grandma makes soup, and I can't find it here. And it was after talking to some amazing elders here who have foraged their whole lives as well, told me about eating curly duck. And then I looked at it and I said, oh, that's stave. I want some. It has like a little tangy flavor. But interestingly enough, I went online to double check that it's the same thing. And I just typed in curly duck, and the first website that popped up was, I think it was the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, and it said weed of the month. And for the first sentence says, I have nothing good to say about this weed. It's ferocious and it takes so much spacing and it has deep roots. And it was just like, it just made me like, I felt like really sad. Like they offended this delicious plant that's so important to me. But it made me think like, they call it invasive, but it's invasive if we don't use it, if we don't eat it, if we don't. It has deep roots, but deep roots are beautiful. They pull in carbon from the atmosphere. Like deep roots that's not a bad thing, but it is a bad thing if you want to have beautifully manicured grass. And so it's one of those things where like, I have lived here and I wasn't confident in identifying, because for me, like in Macedonia, somebody always picked it for me and cooked it for me. Thank you, Baba. But it's like, we take advantage of the greens that are available. Sometimes I think about that as I pull weeds in my garden to plant spinach or kale. And it's like, well, I'm pulling one weed to plant something else that I think it's more culinary appropriate. So anyway, I just want to share that a lot of forage greens, a lot of greens that grow around naturally and abundantly are edible. They're very nutritious. They're very tasty. And they can really provide a lot of calories and nutrients in that season where not much else is growing. It's like the snow has melted. It's kind of like the hungry months. The storage crops have dwindled down. The potatoes have shriveled, and there's just not a lot left. And so curly duck, stinging nettles are amazing as well. And they grow as weeds around here as well. These are all things that grow in Michigan as well. Dandelions, we call it gluvarche. And then I haven't seen too much of sorrel. I've seen it at the farmer's market, people cultivate it. It's like this sour leaf. Sorrel also grows very abundantly in Macedonia, and it has a sour flavor. I've seen wood sorrel in here in Michigan. It has the little yellow flowers, and it looks like a clover a little bit. That's also edible. And then things that are cultivated in the spring are things like green onions, green garlic, and then feta cheese in the spring is commonly consumed. I mean, feta cheese is consumed throughout the year, but eggs are starting to lay. So chickens are starting to lay eggs around the spring. Not early spring, but as the kind of like the later spring months, people are starting to incorporate eggs as well, more into their meals. And so I wanted to just share a brief recipe, and mind you, like all these recipes are suggestions. That's what my mom always told me. All recipes are just suggestions. You can play around with them and make it your own. But it's a very basic soup where you kind of saute the onion. If you have like a green onion or a leek, or even if you have it in your garden, just like the tops of the green onions or the tops of the leeks, saute it in some oil. You add some rice to kind of fry the rice in it a little bit as well. It gets a little bit of that flavor. And then you throw in your greens. Here I put curly duck and nettles mix because that's one of my favorites, but my grandma has made it with just nettles, with just curly duck. You can make this with spinach as well. Like it's delicious with spinach, but mixing the greens and adding the wild with the domesticated just really adds more nutrition and more flavor. And then the seasoning is just some paprika, some salt, crushed pepper flakes. And the pepper flakes that we use are mild. I also sometimes will add, I didn't put it on here, but these are dry peppers that my dad, my father, dries in Macedonia, and he very lovingly cleans the seeds for me and packages them up for me to take, so that I have the flavor of my homeland when I cook. But any sort of dry pepper flakes will do. I will pause right here because I see Deb has a question.
Thank you. I'm wondering, in your recipe, is that half a cup of rice cooked rice or dry rice?
That's dry raw rice. Yeah, it's raw.
Oh,
Good question.
okay, thank you.
Yes, so the rice, usually it's the rice, the raw, just washed, and it's added directly into the oil where you're frying the green onions.
Mhm.
And then it kind of like helps coat the grain of rice with that oil. And then later you add the greens, and then you add the water, and then you boil it and it expands.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, so in the spring, there's many variations of this, and my grandma will tell you that this is often like what they lived off in the spring months. In the more abundant months, like eggs would be added to this, whether they're hard-boiled or pan fried. People would make variation of this where they make it a little bit thicker, and then they put the eggs on top and they bake it in the oven, or served with like a dollop of yogurt as well. So depending on what's available, people have added additional. But I like to eat it in like a soupy form, like a little bit more soupy. And I like to put a splash of vinegar, and it makes this very kind of refreshing soup. And my dad makes the best to me. Okay. Does anybody else have questions about the summer and the foraging? We'll have time at the end, but I just wanted to make sure address. Perfect. Okay. So moving into summer, it's very similar. The climate is very similar to Michigan. So a lot of what's available in the summer is things that are available here. So plenty of tomatoes, cucumbers, pepper, eggplant, zucchinis, watermelons, cherries, strawberries. The feta and the eggs kind of keep coming back. This is just a picture of some of a friend group eating a lunch at the mountain. Oftentimes everybody will just bring something, and everybody would put it all down and cut up the cucumbers and the tomatoes. Usually we call it a cucumber salad, which is just cucumbers, salt, oil, and vinegar. And then the tomato salad is just tomatoes, salt, and oil. Sometimes we add onions to it. Somebody else has a container here I see with tomatoes and feta cheese. There's peppers that are just cut up. There's zucchini that's fried in one of these containers, and somebody has some sort of a dry chicken meat to go with that as well. So summer is usually abundance, and oftentimes people will just eat like this without really cooking too much. Just like they'll say, just like, give me some bread, some tomatoes. My dad will tell stories that as a kid, they would go outside with one hunk of bread in one hand, and the other hand would have a pepper that would be stuffed with cheese, feta cheese, and then trying to figure out where to hold the tomato, but it would be like you take a bite of each and that's your lunch. So for summer, I wanted to share one of my favorite summer dishes, like a cooked meal, and it's called turli tava. And tava is like a dish, basically, like a baking dish. This one is a clay baking dish. And it kind of means like just like a mixed vegetable bake. If you're familiar with the French ratatouille, it's kind of like that, where it's like all of these veggies, they're cooked slowly to release their flavors. So you start by sauteing and caramelizing this onion with a bunch of oil. So it's about a quarter cup of oil. And then you add the tomato, you cook the tomato nicely, you add the peppers until everything softens. And that kind of creates the flavor base. So the onion with the tomato, with the pepper, you add the paprika here, the black pepper, the salt, and it creates this kind of like saucy flavor base. And then in a big pot, not pot, sorry, a pan, the ones that goes in the oven. You add your potatoes, your zucchini, your eggplant, the okra, any other vegetable. My grandma has used green beans in the past, and you coat all of those vegetables with this flavor base that you made in the beginning with the oil and the onion and the garlic, and then you put maybe some water to make sure that it's not super dry, because the water will help cook all the vegetables. And you put it in the oven, and it bakes for about an hour, maybe on 400 degrees, 375, something like that. And when you get it out, it's just this very tender flavors are so incorporated into the vegetables. You know, when you take a bite, you're not always sure, like, was it a zucchini or was it an eggplant? Because it's all like the flavor is like all in it. And in the summertime, especially like now, since I've had a garden in the last few years, this has been one of my favorite things to make, to just take advantage of the abundance. And I mean, meat, people would add meat on the side, or sometimes people would add meat on top of it, depending of the family and depending on what their religious beliefs are. Sometimes people don't eat meat for religious reasons as well. So in our religion, in the Orthodox Christian people, some people who practice like wouldn't eat meat like Wednesday and Friday. And so a lot of our plant-based dishes come also from that, like coming up with like meals to eat on those days. And it just, again, it depends on the season and the availability. But this one can be very versatile. So if you don't have all of these ingredients, that's okay. You use what you have, and it still will be delicious. And then the fall. The fall is the season of abundance. Same like in Michigan. I've been just now slowing down from putting food in jars and drying, and because it's abundance season here as well. But in the fall, as you know, the plants have been planted, established, and they just keep producing. So the grapes are producing grapes, the peppers are just pumping delicious, beautiful peppers, really until it frosts, and it's been frosting later and later. So it's abundant, and this is the time where it's a lot of work to process and put food away in the winter. Anybody who has canned anything or dehydrated anything, you know that it's labor, but also it's like it can be labor of love, and it can be a time where people come together to celebrate. And so I will share here a little bit more about what some of our food processing looks like in the fall, but it's all with that idea in mind that if we process it, if we put food away, then we won't be hungry in the winter, so we'll have abundance. And there's a lot of even like folklore sayings about like, oh, like the fall trash can be spring treasure or something like that, because even just a little bit of food, putting food away, goes a long way. What you see here in the picture is grape wine that my dad had purchased to make wine, and he's made wine every year. And then peppers are being roasted for making this pepper spread that we call ivar, and it's like, you're from Macedonia, what ivar is to kids from Macedonia is very similar to what peanut butter is to kids in America. So it's important. So I will talk a little bit about ivar and the other dishes. But some of the other foods that we preserve, we have pickled vegetables that we call turshia, that people make in big buckets. We make fermented cabbage, like whole heads of cabbage that are very culturally important for our winter foods. We make a lot of cabbage dishes. Cabbage is a resilient plant because even if you don't ferment it, it will last fresh for a while into the winter months. So we have a lot of food with cabbage. Stuffed peppers. A lot of people will freeze peppers, these same peppers that are being roasted here. People would often freeze them raw, or they'll like slightly just cook them in the oven enough to just make them softer, to freeze them without taking too much freezer space. And then they'll have stuffed peppers throughout the winter. And then moussaka is another dish that we make in the fall. So for the fall, I wanted to share kind of two recipes. This one, the fermented cabbage we call it rasol. and the brine from it is rasolnica. It's very near and dear to my heart. It's like sauerkraut, but it tastes different. And I don't exactly know why, because sauerkraut is also technically salt and cabbage chopped up. This one is whole. And in the 11 years that I lived here, I attempted to make it the first year, but you need a cold space. You need to have a cold room, like a shed or a garage, because if it's in a warm space, it will ferment too quickly and then it will start stinking, and it will stink really bad, and it will not be a good idea to have it in your house. So I didn't know that the first year. I was very excited, and my amazing in-laws had welcomed us into their home when we first moved to the country, and I was like, I'm going to make cabbage, sour cabbage, and we're gonna have a great winter. And I put the cabbages up into their basement, and I lovingly poured the water. So you put the cabbages in a bucket. I use the 5-gallon bucket. My father uses like a giant barrel. So you put the salt in them, and then you put the water, and then what you have to do is like you have to dump the water out and back in every day in the beginning to help the salt dissolve. But I think what it also does, it adds oxygen into the mixture, and it helps that fermentation process take place. This is lactofermentation. And then it just, after the 6 weeks, has developed this very tangy, flavorful concoction. But if your space is really warm, it will go very quickly and it will start smelling. So I learned a lesson, and I was waiting until I had a space. Then we lived in an apartments and didn't have the opportunity to make it, because you can't really make a small batch. Like you'd need at least a 5-gallon bucket for this, because cabbages are large. And so last year I made some, and I had 2 5-gallon buckets simultaneously, and I had cabbages that were green cabbages and red cabbages. The red ones were really little, and it was perfect because then they could fill the gaps in my bucket, because otherwise you end up with these big gaps in your bucket because the big cabbages just take so much awkward space. And I ended up with this beautiful bicolor cabbage. So this was green cabbage, but it picked up the color from the red cabbage. And that's why it's kind of like, looks like that half and half. This is good if you eat it raw. We eat it in a salad. So just cut up fermented cabbage with some olive oil or sunflower oil and some pepper flakes on top. And it's like pretty much people would eat this every day before their main meal. It's like an entree. It's like an appetizer, salad, something tangy to go with your meal. And it's very rich in probiotics because it's a fermentation process. Vitamin C, very bioavailable, and it's really helped people stay healthy throughout the winter months when fresh food is not as available. We also cook it. We cook with it. Some of the dishes we make are cabbage rolls. So if you've seen a recipe of like the traditional Polish cabbage roll, it's with a raw cabbage where they steam the leaves, and then they use tomato sauce to kind of add that tanginess. This one, because it's already sour and fermented, it doesn't require that tomato. And so it just uses the flavor in the brine. And people will make 2 different variations of this. They will make a meatless one that people eat a lot in the weeks leading up to Christmas, because a lot of people do Lent, which is no meat for the 6 weeks prior to Christmas. And people would stuff it with rice, like onion and rice, and sometimes chopped up walnuts. And they'll make these tiny little cabbage rolls that are so delicious, that are so tedious, and people would often get together and make a big batch of those. And then if people are eating meat, often it would be ground pork that would be cooked in with the rice, and then they'll be stuffed. And we eat this pretty much throughout the month of April, depending on when the weather starts getting warm. But by the time the spring comes and it starts to get warmer, the cabbage is also starting to get softer and less appealing. And then usually you have to basically be done with it. So dump the brine. And my grandma, the way she's preserved this flavor, sometimes she would take the soft cabbage at the end of the season. She would cut it up very finely, and she would kind of saute it in some oil and freeze it in little packages. And then she would have that for future meals throughout the summer, just because it's sad to throw it away if you still have some leftovers. The brine is delicious to just drink if you like anything like remotely kind of pickled flavor. I also discovered that you can pickle eggs in the brine, just hard-boiled eggs, and you can put them in the brine. And it's a really delicious flavor. And if you like the color, they turn pink if you use the purple cabbage. And also somebody introduced me to the idea of mixing a tomato juice in the brine and just drinking it like that, which reminded me, if you're a Bloody Mary person, you can add it to Bloody Mary for flavor as well. And then Ivar. So Ivar, I referenced it earlier, and I will talk a little bit about it again. It's basically how we celebrate the pepper. Pepper in Macedonia is a big staple. There's fields and fields of peppers. We eat it pretty much in every meal. But Ivar, it's this dish that's roasted peppers that then have been peeled. So you can see the roasting process is like fire roasting. They get charred. And then they get peeled. So that charred part gets peeled off. And then what's left is just very beautiful, tender flesh that's very full of flavor. And that gets ground into a meat grinder. So not a food processor, not getting it super pulverized, but just like ground. And then also adding eggplants that have been also roasted and added into the mixture. And then this picture down here, the second on the bottom, it's a really big pot where all of that goes into the roasted peppers, the already ground up roasted peppers go into this pot, and they get cooked down with oil. We use sunflower oil, a fair amount of sunflower oil in this large quantity, salt, and some people like to add a little bit of vinegar, a little bit of sugar, just for like a little flavor peak. You can, or you don't have to, just depends. Again, every family has their own recipe. But in Macedonia, when you make this dish, you at least have to have the recipe that I have from my mom. It says you start with 60 pounds of peppers. That's the batch. And you can see these pictures down at the bottom. It's my husband and I trying to load a bag of 60 pounds of peppers onto our bike to take home after purchasing it at the farmer's market. And then after which he gives up and he says, give me the bag, and then takes the sack of peppers to take home, because that's the batch, and that's how they sell them. They sell them in these 60-pound bags, and you can negotiate a little bit on the price, but it's pretty much what you need. And then for that, you would need around 10 large eggplants to make this batch of Ivar. When we make this, it's a lot of work, but it's a time of celebration. Again, people will come together. Everybody in the neighborhood will know what you're making, because the smell of roasted peppers is just delightful. And then we put it in jars and we can it. And it's something we eat throughout the winter. And up here, you'll see some pictures of Ivar being served on little pieces of bread. I think this was like a cultural event that I attended a while ago at an event, and served Ivar and some pickled vegetables. And there's some other Macedonian products like juice and beer. But sometimes we will add feta cheese on top as well. And people eat it like an open-faced sandwich. It's just bread and Ivar and cheese sometimes. And then the winter months this is a picture of a table at my aunt's house, Teta Zore. She always provides the most beautiful spreads anytime we go there. But it's like we make a lot of savory pies. So this picture here that you see is called zelnik. It's like a bread dough that's been kind of layered with butter or margarine. But it's not as flaky as spanakopita, but it's like a little flaky. And it can be stuffed with anything that you have. It can be stuffed with just spinach. It can be stuffed with spinach or any sort of green and cheese. My grandma has made it with onions, with pumpkin, with squash, with anything that you really have. Just depends on what your family likes. Leeks. And then a lot of fermented veggies. We eat a lot of dry beans. And then all the foods that we preserved. And then things at the farmer's market that are available. Things like chestnuts and persimmons and root vegetables that are available throughout the winter. So for this month, for this season, I want to share the recipe of tavče gravče. So this is a baked beans dish. The beans are a very important food to us. And I have I'm just going to show you. This is the bean that I'm referencing. It's a bean that I brought from Macedonia. My brother actually brought it for me. It's our typical bean that we eat. It's called graf, and tavče grafče means little beans in a pan. And we soak them. We soak the cup of dry beans overnight, then we boil them. We add some, we saute some onion with garlic in oil. We add paprika to make that flavor base. Similar, it's kind of like a roux. You add a little bit of flour too, which I forgot to include on here. You don't always have to add flour because beans have that little starchiness, but if you want to make it a little thicker, you can. And then you mix that flavor base into the boiled beans with a little bit of that water, and you put it in a baking dish, sprinkle some dry mint on top. And this is a dish that people eat fairly often. We eat it in a soup form, so more often you would eat it in a soup form. And for a fancier occasion, people will make it into a baked bean into the oven. And I'm very grateful to be able to have the opportunity to grow this bean and share with our community. So if anybody's interested in growing, I'd be really happy to share the story of the bean and share the seeds and have it abundant in our community in Kalamazoo as well. And so because we're getting to the end of the time, I wanted to give photo credits for all of these pictures to my amazing brother, Stefan, who I hope he's here. But my brother is a photographer, and I showed a lot of pictures in the beginning and throughout that came from him. And he has been working before the pandemic. He was working on this project called Moj roden kraj, which means my homeland. And he took on this quest to go to every single village of the country. That was the initial idea, and to photograph every single village from an aerial view, so using a drone to photograph the people, the religious kind of institution, whether it's a church or a mosque, and to capture some of the stories. Because like I mentioned, some of the elders that we saw in the beginning in the first pictures, those elders are the last people living in those villages. A lot of the younger people have moved either to the city or they've moved abroad. And so this is a project to capture really the beauty and some of the wisdom as well. So he completed one whole municipality, one whole county, and he printed this book as a tester to see what it would look like. He was collaborating with with my uncle Draghi from Australia, and they were trying to figure out how to make this available to a lot of the Macedonians that are in the diaspora. There's a lot of Macedonians who have emigrated abroad, and then they have had their kids born abroad, but the connection is still there. My grandma's had 4 of her siblings emigrated to Australia in the 40s and 50s. So, for example, half of our relatives are in the other parts of the world. And so this book, I'm hoping that he finds a way to continue this, maybe find a publisher who will actually accept this project. The one book is completed. It has pictures from literally every single village of that one county. And that's a lot of villages, a lot of hills to be hiked and accessed. And he's taken his bikes some places, and my dad has helped him for some of the other ones. But he has a wealth of information and pictures. And so I wanted to share that. And I wanted to say thank you with putting a picture of my grandma, Baba Olga, stirring the pot of Ivar, the real labor of love. She has been my nurturer and my teacher. And I'm hoping she's here today with my dad. And I wanted to open it up for questions if anybody had any questions.
Anne Wright wanted to know, are the beans like navy beans?
Kind of. They're kind of like a navy bean, kind of like a cannellini bean, and kind of like a Great Northern bean. Yes, I've been able to use all 3 of those to make this dish. So you can make this dish really with any bean that's creamy. You wouldn't want to make it with red beans like kidney beans. You want a creamy bean. So yes, they're kind of like that. Yeah.
Okay, Deb has her hand raised.
I'm wondering if your red peppers are spicy and if your paprika is smoked. smoked or if it's just plain paprika.
The peppers are generally not spicy, generally. But even to this day, when I cook and I want to make sure my 4-year-old will eat what I make, I have to taste it because sometimes a spicy one occasionally will get in there. You could buy the spicy ones. They're usually smaller, and they those also get dried. Typically in the dishes though, like it would be the mild peppers that get used. And the paprika is typically not smoked. The way that our paprika is made is people hang their peppers along their houses, the people that grow these peppers, and then they get taken into like a mill basically where they get milled. But before they get milled, they get put in an oven on a low temp where they just get kind of completing the drying process so that they're super, super dry, but not smoked. And then they get ground into, like, basically, I think they use like a flour mill, the same mill that would grind the grains. They would use that type of mill to grind the peppers.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pepper that is very like, it's not very meaty. It's very like just, it's like mostly skin, but very good for paprika. Oh, Steve?
Yeah, Christina, thanks so much. When do we get samples?
Samples. I do think that for some of these things, the only way to learn how to make it is to get together and cook. So my dream is for our people in the community to collectively grow this pepper because, 60 pounds is a lot and I grew them, but I never had 60 pounds at the same time. But if we collectively grow them and we all get together, somebody's backyard, and make Ivar, then we get to try it because that's the only way to make Ivar, which is why I didn't really include a recipe. I was like, it's pointless. We just need to make it.
Okay, count me in.
Okay.
Where do I get the seeds?
I got the seeds. If anybody wants seeds, I did include my email in the beginning. I will include it again on here. And I'm actually working on documenting the story of the seeds. I just documented the story of the beans because I do think that it's important when we share seeds to share the story. And this pepper and the bean, they didn't start with me. They started with lovely people in my community, and I wanna give kudos and credit to them. And so if you would like some of the seeds, I would love to also give you the story. So then you can keep sharing them and keep telling the story.
Are the eggplants different than what we typically get around here? I don't know where the origin of the eggplant is.
We do have quite a bit of a selection of eggplants here. The ones that we use are more of like the Turkish ones, the bulkier, the bigger ones. So I've been able to find them available, the similar eggplant to the one we have back home. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Hristina, I am curious. It seems like from your stories that your family is all like carrying forward such a lovely value of the land and the people and the food. Do you have early memories or thoughts about what kinds of things your family did to instill that in each of you, or maybe just in you?
The love of food. That's a good one, Jenny. Well, since I was talking about the seeds and the stories, I'll answer the question by telling you the story of these beans really quick, because I do think that has a lot to do with, so this bean grows very well in one specific village in my homeland. It's called Kishava, and not everybody can grow these beans, but they do a really good job growing them. I met a family from this village about 15 years ago when my brother and I and some friends were hiking, and we were spending the night in a mountain hut. And this other family was there also spending the night, but they were from this village and they had been harvesting wild blueberries all day for export, for sale. So they were there with their horses. And when they saw us arriving into this mountain hut, this is not a fancy mountain hut. You have to make your own food and do everything. It's just a place to stay. They immediately, they were making homemade egg noodles and just added more noodles to the pot. They were like, oh, who are these hungry kids coming? Let's feed them as well. and they just like fed us and they welcomed us, and they were also working all day, and they just went to this mountain hub to sleep. I remembered vividly that connection, that like food was always to be shared, and food was always there to bring people together, and it doesn't matter who you are. And I did share a lot about like the Christianity and Islam in Macedonia. In the past, there had been animosity for whatever reason, because of politics and because of, and you know, there was and so like sometimes even like how people are like, Islam villages and Christian villages are separate, and people didn't always like, they were like, there wasn't very like strong kinship, but when people really just talked to each other, when they got to know each other, that difference was very obvious, that it wasn't a difference. We were just all like, yes, we have different beliefs and different worship, maybe different gods, but like ultimately we're just the people on the mountain that came here to spend the night and eat, and like, and so this family, they were from Kishava, which is primarily a Muslim village, and my family in like Bitola, like it's primarily Christian, and I'm sharing this because I do think it's important, because sometimes we see like all these differences in each other for really no founded reason. But anyway, they welcomed us and fed us, and they told us about their journey. They had their horses, and they went on to continue harvesting blueberries the next day, and then we went back home. My brother then went to the farmer's market and found this family, and they were selling beans. They were selling these beans at the farmer's market. He bought some. They were the best that we've ever had. He shared with some family. He shared with some other friends. And we ran into this family multiple more times at the mountain. This is what they did in the summertime. They harvested wild blueberries for sale. This is how they supported their family. And a few years later, they invited us over to their village for Ramadan. And they invited us over for Turkish coffee and for baklava. And we went to their house, and we were welcomed like, the coffee was very sweet because we were sweet guests. And it was just this very like beautiful kinship and connection. And they took us for a walk in their fields where the corn and the beans were growing together. And Nimet, who was one of the lady, she just squealed out of happiness when she saw the beans had started flowering. And it just like made me realize like, gosh, like there's just so much we should be like to be grateful for. And like my people are celebrating that in just like everyday life, whether that's through just adding a little bit more noodles to the pot, or just celebrating the first bean flower, just celebrating this life. Every breath we take is because we, because of nature. And so, I don't know, I think it's those moments, it's moments like that, that have really solidified that like love for me, that no matter what I've done in my life, like I keep going back to that. I keep finding strength and inspiration in that. And no matter what happens in the world, in like the political setting even, because like I feel like I just like know ultimately like that's just genuinely caring for one another. And I did think I could live without this bean, because I was like, surely I can find beans. There's navy beans, there's kidney beans, there is all kinds of beans here. But I did miss this bean, and my brother brought me the beans a couple of years ago. Yeah, so I feel this connection. Yeah, and I just keep trying to find that as well in my everyday life here too. It's like, what does that look like now? What does that look like in this other part of the world, in this other culture? But like carrying some of those main principles of just life and just abundance forward. That was a long and winded answer, but yeah, Christy Lou.
I just wanted to add, if I may, I have had the honor of being in Macedonia with Christina's family. And I just wanted to add to Jenny, that thread though of family, of community, it runs so deeply. And though Hristina has been here in America, she has continued to, I don't even know how to say it, to continue to weave that thread. She has with my husband and I feel like we're part of that family now. And after being in Macedonia, we had the honor of attending Stefan and Maria's wedding, and being there, we were part of it. We were part of that community. And there's that culture, it just runs so deeply. They're so proud of their culture, and Christina's continued to do that here, you know, with her. It's not even a job to her. It's this. She is so part of this community and spreading all of this. She truly does. We are so proud of her. She's part of us. I'll get very emotional about it, but yeah, she's very special, but it's her family, it's her culture that has done this. You asked that, Jenny, and it's hard to explain what she's part of, but it's very, very special. It really is.
Thank you, Christy-Lou.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you,
thank
baby.
Christina. And I would agree. I think Christina is very special.
She is.
I see
We're-
the things.
We're blessed. We're very blessed to
Too.
have her here because she has very something to share with us, and she's doing that. We're proud of this kid.
Any
guys.
other questions then?
Deb, thank you all.
I just want to ask, how do we get the seeds?
I put my email on here. It's hpetrovska@kvcc.edu. I put it in the chat. If you email me, I will arrange for you to meet up and give you some seeds. My hope is that eventually I will have them available in the Seed Collaborative, the Seed Library, Kalamazoo Seed Collaborative. But I think I might need to grow them out one more year to have a little bit more to share. But I have plenty right now to share with anybody on this call who wants some.
It is past 1 o'clock. What I would like to do though is to thank Hristina for this discussion and also to remind people we are a country of immigrants. Every person, including the indigenous, came from somewhere else originally. And I think that is something that I've always wanted to honor, that we need to remember that we all came from someplace and we're all going to be going somewhere else. You know? So thank you for talking about Macedonia. I think Thanksgiving time is a very appropriate time to be talking about foods from around the world. And I actually took pictures of your recipes.
Thank you, Nikki. I just wanted to add to the one more thing, about like how we all came from somewhere. I also love like the principle that Robin Wall Kimmerer, who was here last week, wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. She has pointed out in her book that like how to become indigenous to place, and has really stuck with me as someone who has this like strong pull to my homeland. But like, what does it really mean to become indigenous to place? And I think it has to do with like how the connection to the land, and no matter where you are, no matter how short of a time you're gonna stay in that space, like if you live in a good relationship with the land, like there you belong, you're a part of the space. And that could look many different ways. You can plant a tree, plant a garden, eat the weed. It can look in many different ways, but to me that resonated a lot. That has made me feel even more at home here, that's far away from my home. And I hope we carry that forward as well. But thank you all for coming and joining, yeah, honored to be in this community with you all. Thanks.
Thank you.